Good morning. Welcome, everyone. It's just on 10. We're just going to give, people to join another minute or so. So, yeah. Excellent. People are joining.
You arrived safely, Cliff?
It's 2 minutes past. I think we'll get started and we'll just keep, admitting people as they join. So I might as well get started. Can everybody hear me okay? Good. Excellent. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the panel discussion on inclusive teaching. Obviously, it's a topic of interest for a lot of people, so it's fantastic to see the turnout. Before we begin, just a few quick reminders. The Q&A panel has been activated for today's session, so you're welcome to post your questions there throughout the session and share your thoughts via chat. At the end of the panel discussion, there will be an opportunity to ask, questions directly to the panel members. But in the meantime, we kindly ask you to keep your microphones muted and save any live questions for the end. And finally, this session is being recorded and will be available to access via the Teaching Academy's events team channel, as well as YouTube channel as well. But you'll get all that information afterwards. So let's get started. So today we are delighted to bring together colleagues from across the university who will share practical strategies and lived insights from a range of disciplinary contexts on inclusive teaching. This session is designed for everyone, whether you're just beginning to explore inclusive practices or are already weaving them deeply into your teaching. Our aim is to spark conversation, exchange ideas, and offer inspiration on how we can create learning environments that foster belonging, meaningful choice, and equitable participation for all students. It's now my pleasure to introduce our panel chair, Dr. Helen Taylor. Helen is a lecturer in human resource management in the School of Business. She joined Charlestown University at the start of 2024 and brings a strong passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion, both in her research and her teaching practice. Her work focuses on the importance of care in inclusive education, including LGBTIQA plus inclusion and teaching neurodiverse cohorts. I will now hand over to Helen to do an acknowledgement of country and introduce our panel members. Helen, over to you.
Thank you so much. All right. Now, so I just want to begin. We respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we live and work together. Charlestown University and its staff pay respect to elders within First Nations communities and acknowledge the continuity of cultures, languages, leadership and knowledge systems. We acknowledge First Nations people's continuous connection to country, recognising the unique diverse identities and cultures of peoples in our communities, our region and our nation. As such, we value the collaboration to strongly position First Nations peoples in our university through languages, leadership, cultures, knowledges, research and ceremonies. I'm so thrilled to see so many people here. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time today. We really have been so excited putting this panel together. So it's really nice to have so many people in the room with us, and really encouraging to know how many people share this passion. Today, as Amita mentioned, we're bringing this passion to our panel. We're going to understand a little bit more about what we share that connects us across disciplines. So a really nice chance to hear from people you may not have heard of and from before. Before I get started, a really quick thank you, of course, to Teaching Academy for supporting us. Amita particularly has been so amazing, and also would like to thank Associate Professor Cliff Lewis for his work in bringing us together as well. Today we want to discuss some of our kind of key elements of inclusive teaching and think about how this our pedagogy and our practice translates into what we do in classrooms. Hoping that you're coming away from this maybe with some new ideas, whether they're the kind of big picture ones or those small everyday things that we might be able to do. As we'll hear, some ways to be inclusive are very easy and quite simple to add in. We're hoping to renew your passion and determination, because we are all very passionate and determined to inclusively teach always. We do really want this to be an exchange and a conversation. So we of course have our amazing panel who I'm about to introduce, but I also want you to be thinking as they're speaking about what you want to add. We've got a Q&A function specifically for questions, but please also feel free where you're called to use the chat if you want to add a further reflection, some suggestions. We've got, you know, all of those opportunities as different ways for you to be involved and contribute. But let's get to know our panellists. I'm going to start with Robin Jarman. So Robin's a lecturer of haematology within the School of Dentistry and Medical Science, and loves passing on extensive industry knowledge and practical experience in medical laboratory science to our next generation of medical scientists. Her teaching style is student-centred, and she's very passionate about inclusive teaching practices and a pedagogy of kindness. Robin, I'd love for you to introduce yourself a little further and maybe talk to us a little bit about your background and what has brought you to this point.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. So I come from a background of working in industry for over 25 years in pathology laboratories for New South Wales Health Pathology, and also in the UK for the NHS. When I started working for Charles Sturt University as a casual academic about 5 years ago, I sort of didn't know anything about inclusive teaching practices at that time, but as my journey has progressed and I've moved not only from teaching in haematology subjects, but also in the workplace learning space, I've come across many neurodivergent students who have really caught my attention, and I have become very interested and passionate about helping neurodivergent students find their place within the medical science profession and reframing neurodivergence as a strength and even a superpower in medical science. A lot of people that work in medical science are already on the spectrum. So it's like science is an industry that really sort of draws people with neurodivergence to it. And neurodivergent students are of great benefit to the industry, and they can bring new ideas to an industry that can sometimes be really set in its ways. So there can be a real, this is how it's always been done mindset in medical science, and neurodivergent students really bring a fresh breath of fresh air into the industry. So that's where my passion is, and ever since then I've become super passionate about inclusive teaching practices across all of my subjects. So yeah, I'm really pleased to be here.
Beautiful. Thank you, Robin. I've just seen that Holly Randall-Moon, Associate Professor Holly Randall-Moon, has joined us as well. So Holly is a non-Indigenous researcher who uses critical race and whiteness studies theories to situate her Anglo-Celtic family and settler ancestors within social and built landscapes of settler colonisation. Holly, I'd love for you to jump in and give us a little bit more of a sense of your background and what key interests have brought you to our panel.
Great, thank you, Helen. It's great to be here, and I'm really interested in hearing the questions and the discussion that we'll be having today. So yeah, look, as Helen said, I'm a non-Indigenous lecturer. I'm based in the School of Indigenous Australian Studies at the Dubbo campus of Charles Sturt. Today I'm at the Wagga campus of Charles Sturt, and I'm zooming in from Wiradjuri country, and I'd like to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. And as Helen said in her introduction, my area of research and pedagogical expertise is in critical race and whiteness studies, so promoting anti-racist teaching and research, as well as racial literacies. And as part of that, I guess the two pedagogical approaches that I use are intersectionality and unpacking the different ways in which we all contain multiple identities, and some of those identities intersect with privilege, and some of those identities may intersect with marginalisation. And the other pedagogy that I use is relationally responsive standpoint, which comes from the work of Tyson Yunkaporta and Auntie Doris Shillingsworth, who's an elder based in Dubbo. And the purpose of that relationally responsive standpoint is to think about the ways in which we're situated in relation to knowledge. And we're always responding to knowledge, we're always responding to others. So we never have a kind of identity or way of knowing that is simply individual or isolated from others. We're always learning, we're always knowing, and we're always taking in experiences that change us in relation to others. And I guess what does that mean for me as a non-Indigenous researcher working within critical race theory? It means what Helen read out as part of my bio, which is how can I situate myself within processes of settler colonisation? How have those historical processes shaped my identity, my standpoint, and the way in which I relate to history? I think that's about enough from me. But yeah, thank you, Helen, and really looking forward to the discussion today. And sorry for being late, Helen.
No, glad to have you, Holly. Thank you so much. Finally, I'd like to introduce Dr. Natalie Thompson. Natalie's teaching and research draw on critical theories of education, focus on literacies, disability, inclusion, and teacher education. So most recently, she's designed a suite of disability affirming and disability informed short courses to support more inclusive education practices. Natalie, would you like to give us a little bit more of a sense about you as our final panel member?
Thanks, Helen, and thank you for inviting me to be on this panel, and thanks everyone for coming along to hear us chat. So I'm a teacher. I've been a classroom teacher for about 15 years, on and off in different roles. I miss the classroom, but I love the work we do here at university. I think I'm still a teacher in that capacity, just in a different setting. I've become quite almost obsessively interested with the question of what is the purpose of education. It sort of is the guiding light of almost everything I do in my writing, thinking, everyday life, conversations with people outside of education. And to me, I think that, inclusive education is at the heart of that. So I'm always thinking about what it means to be inclusive. So I guess as an introduction, I don't want to get started on the panel. I could just sense that was about to happen, so I'll get back on track. But I guess what brings me to this space in a higher education setting is that I thought I had developed a pretty good understanding of what inclusive teaching looked like in the primary school classroom. And I have since made the move to university been continually learning and unlearning what that might look like in this context. And so happy to talk about the things that I've learned and that I'm still learning.
Amazing. I love that idea of learning and unlearning. I think that when you're in education, that's what we're all kind of signing ourselves up for. So that's, a great place for us to start. We have a few big questions, I guess, for the panel, but they have been warned in advance what they are. So we might jump on into those for the next part of our event. And I guess we might get started. Maybe actually, Natalie, I might get you to start us off. Our first question we want to dig into is the why. Why is it important to actively embrace affirming and inclusive approaches in higher education? Talked about the purpose of education as a focus of yours, so you're up first.
I might just keep going then.
Yeah, go for it.
So, yeah, I think that's a great continuation thing. I almost went there anyway. That, with the purpose of education, I've always said in my teachings in schools and at university that inclusive education is actually just another name for good teaching. And I've kind of progressed that thinking a little bit more in the last few years to think that if it's not inclusive, it's not actually education. It's some sort of system of oppression, of repeating just dominant forms of, I don't know, privilege. So little thinking about what Holly said, and I've learned a lot from getting to know Holly over the last few years too, and that type of thinking, that education isn't neutral, and we're not just delivering kind of content that is neutral. We haven't designed, the way we've designed university, like the way we've designed schools, is not some sort of neutral thing. We've designed it with some people in mind, with some knowledges in mind. And so for me, this is really social justice work. This is core. This is core to what I'm doing. If I'm not designing education in a way that is for everyone, then it's not really, I'm not really doing my job. I'm doing a half of a job. I'm just teaching some people. So I find that it's, when I say it's, you know, why, I think it's central to what we're doing. It's so that education can happen. And I think as an institution, if we really mean what we say we mean, you know, our wonderful vision statements and creating a world worth living in the future, then inclusive teaching has to be central to what we're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you. Robin, did you want to add to that, for you, the why it's important to actively embrace affirming and inclusive approaches in your teaching?
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't agree with Natalie more. Before I became a teacher, I lived with a teacher for most of my life. My dad is a teacher and has been a teacher for 70-something years and is still kicking at 84. And I think I learnt by osmosis how to be a teacher from him. And he told me when I first started working at CSU as a lecturer that half of the job of teaching is teaching people to learn to love. And to love to learn. And if you give them the learning bug, then half the job's done and the rest of it's easy. And he's right. And if you make education accessible and you make people feel like they belong, so that, you know, our world is a diverse world. So it's crazy to not have a diverse education system, because when students leave and go into the world, they're entering a very diverse world. And we need to create an environment where people want to keep coming back and want to keep learning. And if we make people feel seen, valued, respected, that makes them feel empowered. And when we all know in our own lives that when we meet someone that really sees us and accepts us for who we are, whether that be our partner or our best friend or whatever, we feel valued, and that's where we thrive, when we feel really seen. So it's the same for students. If they feel that their educator really sees them for who they are and values them for who they are, then they're going to openly engage. They're going to want to keep coming back. And if we do this, if we set up these supportive environments where everybody feels valued for who they are, then we won't have brilliant students slipping through the cracks because, you know, one little institutional old way of doing things just was a barrier for them, you know. And Natalie is so right that education can be really oppressive. You know, it has been set up in this way of you sit here, you watch and you shut up and you learn. And yeah, it doesn't have to be like that. So yeah, I think I'm just echoing what Natalie said, really.
No, that's great. I mean, the why question, I think we're capturing that there. Holly, I'd love for you to add in any kind of additional reflections, why it's so important to embrace inclusive teaching.
Thank you. And thank you, Natalie and Robin. I feel like I'm going to echo the points that you've made, because I think you've kind of nailed it there, which is that the education system, including higher education, isn't neutral, like the information and knowledge that we have, but even the way in which we access education through online systems or the physical layout of buildings, though the way in which learning spaces are arranged, whether they're online or in person, are also not neutral and can reproduce particular kinds of privilege. So I think it's really important. I think what inclusive teaching does is make you really conscious and reflexive and critical of that. And also, as Robin said too, we live in a diverse world, and we want our students to be able to take their education and be able to make meaningful contributions to that diverse world as well. And in terms of intersectionality, our experiences change, our experiences with marginalisation or privilege change throughout our life. So inclusive teaching is also about having that responsivity to the ways in which we change and students change as well. So when you undertake inclusive teaching, it's sort of not like you do kind of like one thing and now you're inclusive. It does mean it's an ongoing responsibility to I think also to I think I might did I just freeze then or am I still
We've got you again.
Am I
You've
still
come
talking?
back. Yep. Thanks, Holly.
cool.
Yeah.
Sorry, just relying on the speaking of inclusive teaching, just relying on the internet at CSU Wagga campus. I think I was at the point where I was saying too, I guess coming from an Indigenous discipline, it's difficult to think about how you would teach Indigenous studies in a way that isn't inclusive, given that what you're doing is bringing Indigenous expertise, scholarship and perspectives into an education setting that, as Natalie said, isn't neutral. It comes with a history and it comes with relations of privilege as well. I do have more to say, but I think I might just stop because I'm worried I'll freeze.
No, that's fine. And I think so many things that you've all touched on lead us really beautifully into our kind of additional questions as well. I think, you know, everybody that signed up to come along, the why is probably apparent for all of us in the Teams room here in various ways, but it's really nice to have some of those aspects kind of set out. And I've already got more things to follow up on and ask you about, but let's stick with our questions. We wanted to really get into some of the very hands-on nuts and bolts, how we're doing this. And this is where it's so great to have the three of you from different disciplines. So the question that I wanted to put to you is how you're embedding inclusive teaching practices in your disciplines, and maybe a sense of which kind of strategies you've used that have been really effective. Perhaps I will start off with Robin for this next question. So you'd mentioned a little bit, you know, around kind of neurodiverse cohorts and what neurodivergent students bring to the picture. How are you bringing those to the forefront and encouraging those in your teaching work?
Yeah. So first of all, my work sort of started off with neurodivergent students, but then I realized that really it applies to every student, the way you approach teaching. So my approach is to always come from the pedagogy of kindness and compassion. You know, life is hard. It's hard for all of us. It's hard for academics. It's hard for students. And so no one wants to be a number. We want to be treated like a human being. And I think forming relationships is really important rather than just being, you know, the sage on the stage or whatever that is. It's more about being a peer and having relationships with your students. And I think being vulnerable myself, so it has really helped, admitting my shortcomings. So if I'm having a bad day, I've got brain fog or whatever, I feel a bit under the weather, just being really honest. I'm terrible at maths and I'm a science teacher. And I always just say to my students, I'm really bad at maths. One of you help me, you know? So I think if you appear to be this perfect person at the front of the classroom, then the students feel like, well, I can never attain that goal because I'm not perfect. So that's the first thing for me, is just not being perfect, not pretending to be perfect, not being intimidating, and being someone that's approachable and kind of real to the students. The other thing is just making really what feel like incredibly small changes to the way I do things that can make an enormously, like, life-changing difference to the student. And so you might think, oh, this is going to take me a little bit of extra time, but that extra time just opens up a world to a student that, you know, the barrier is suddenly gone. So an example of this is in the workplace learning setting. Some of our neurodivergent students find processes that we have put in place for workplace learning really to be very difficult. And one of them is really simple. When we set them up with a workplace and they have to go on workplace subjects, we expect the student to reach out and introduce themselves to the lab manager. And for some neurodivergent students, they find that step incredibly confronting. They're ringing up someone they've never met before and they have to introduce themselves. So to overcome that, it was just a no-brainer. I was like, okay, well, you know me, we have a relationship. I know the manager of the lab, we have a relationship. We'll set up an icebreaker meeting on Zoom or in person if possible. I introduce the student to the manager, and all of a sudden that first really, really anxiety-inducing step is gone. They met the manager. The managers are really great with this. They actually like it too, because probably a lot of them are on the spectrum and have anxiety about meeting the students that they don't know. So little things like that, you know, helping the student go through the feedback that they get from the manager. Sometimes if they're just given written feedback, it can be really confronting. They can overthink things and overread feedback that's actually quite constructive, but they can really look at it as a negative. So rather than them go through it by themselves and then stew over what they've read, I'll go through it with them. So, you know, it might take a little bit of extra time out of your day, but in doing those little things first, you mitigate a disaster from happening, and then there's less cleanup, you know, so it's almost like stopping having to do troubleshooting down the line. And the other one is, you know, picking the right atmosphere for the student. So really thinking per student. You know, some students might not be suited to going to an enormous lab with 400 staff, full of fluorescent lights, beeping clocks everywhere. Like, laboratories can be incredibly noisy and chaotic environments. But, you know, you might have a student that would be really suited to go to a small regional lab with 5 staff members, you know, and a garden outside where they can go and sit and have some time out when they need it. So, yeah, it's just about, for me, it's just about being kind and treating every single person as an individual rather than this is the process, everyone does it the same way. So, yeah, I think that's, I don't know, I could keep going, but I won't because there's other people here.
Thank you, Robin. Those are great. And it's really interesting to hear some specific examples too, because yes, of course, I love the idea of spending a little extra time now to save yourself, you know, time managing maybe bigger, more complex things later on in the process. Let's maybe
students' anxiety, and just mitigating that horrible anxiety that a student might then be going through. You know, they might sit for 4 days or 5 days on a problem before they pluck up the courage to come to you, you know, and you think about that poor person for 4 days they've been stewing, not sleeping properly, worried about this issue when it could have just been, you know, never an issue in the first place.
Yes, amazing. Thank you. Holly, let's brave your internet and move to you next. We're looking for how you're embedding inclusive teaching practices. I'm really interested to hear, you know, that relationally responsive standpoint approach, but perhaps you've also got some other examples to share for your work.
Great, thank you. I mean, I go back to intersectionality too as well, because I think if you're embedding intersectionality in terms of your pedagogy and your approach and your materials, it is helpful for students, and it does mean that you're able to kind of build on their literacy in relation to identifying power or colonising knowledges, starting from themselves and how they relate to the knowledge, how they might position themselves in relation to what they're learning, or even how they might position themselves in terms of a learning space as well. Like a lot of the way that I teach is to, okay, let's start where you're sitting in a classroom. Let's start what room you're in. Let's think about how that might already start to bring up relations of power, intersections with privilege, or intersections with marginality as well. And I think also, just echoing what Robin was saying too, it can be undertaking sort of what seem like small things, but practices of responding and relating to students that are affirmative as well. So for students with different abilities, it's really quite a big deal to approach, I think it's called Access now, and get a study access plan, and to reach out to a lecturer and ask for, I mean, because you're kind of like outing yourself as having a particular ability. So I think also, you know, just doing kind of little things, saying, oh, well done for getting this, or well done for reaching out, or if somebody wants to, I'm pretty casual with extensions too, I admit. So if a student reaches out and they need an extension, I'm usually like, oh, you know, thank you for reaching out. I appreciate that you're going through a hard time at the moment, but you're staying focused and you want to engage on your study. So I think trying to be affirmative in the way that you communicate with students. And I think also one component of implementing inclusive teaching is being proactive if you do recognise gaps in systems and processes, and trying to advocate for students when you see those gaps and those processes. I remember during COVID-19, I had quite a few students reach out to me with experiences of domestic violence, and the way that the special considerations were set up weren't always as responsive to those students as they could be. So I engaged in that process and had a meeting with Stacey Jenkins and said, is there something we can do here to make it easier for students? So I think that's a really important component as well, is that inclusive teaching is also about responding to those structures and systems which might be exclusive as well. I hope there was no glitching.
No, the internet's on our side right now. I think it's so interesting to think about, you know, that you're, as part of your teaching, giving students the tools to engage with and critique the structures that they're part of in the education system. I'm sure that they step out of, you know, that setting and start to notice other things as well. So that's a really interesting piece to bring into the mix. And you know, Robin, absolutely filling big forms in can be intimidating, even as an academic, so let alone as a student, I can imagine. We'd like to move to Natalie next with our how question. I'm sure there's loads of ways, but how are some of the ways that you're embedding inclusive teaching practices in education as a discipline?
Thanks, Helen. And I want to acknowledge that I want to talk a little bit more about the special cons process, but I'm going to keep it partitioned into the challenges section in a moment, so I don't get off track so early in the day. But I think it's a really interesting point that you raised, Holly, there. So I think I want to start this by acknowledging that I'm a non-disabled person, or some reframing it as someone who's been enabled by our institutions, speaking about really the context of disability in education. And I think that acknowledging that is really important, and acknowledging that is actually one of the biggest things that I'm learning, that our understandings of inclusive education have been built on the ideas and experiences of the world of people who don't have lived experience of disability. And as such, we've just missed things, really important things. And so even though I've been in inclusive education for a long time, my work over the last year, which has been much more focused on co-designing and speaking to people with lived experience of disability, I've learned more about this in the last year than in the last 20 years, just because I've tried to make more space for those voices, and just things that, you know, I couldn't see from my non-disabled worldview, that I thought I was doing things that were helpful, but completely missing the point in many instances. And they're just little things. Like, I can give you an example. This is not quite off topic, but it's illustrative. I think I was at a conference I don't know, the end of last year somewhere on a CSU campus up in Port Macquarie, and the person that was speaking, the microphone stopped working, and he was trying to fuss around. He's like, "Oh, can you all hear me?" And we're like, yeah, keep going. We can all hear you. And then a new colleague that I was working with at lunchtime said, "Oh, that was such a pain because the device that I had that picked up the voice that allowed me to hear the presentation didn't work without a microphone, and I was excluded for the rest of the presentation." And, I can stand up here and say I'm an inclusive educator. I've been studying this for years. I've done a PhD. I've studied, I didn't even think about that experience on the world. So just listening to people with lived experience, I think is really important. So that's a big change I've made. So I guess I've got some practical ways I can do. I'm doing that. I do an acknowledgement of diversity at the beginning of my classes. And so not similar, different to an acknowledgement of country in that I'm educating, we're teaching on stolen land, which I think is important to think about what that means, but that I acknowledge diversity and I kind of try to create the conditions where I let people know that I'm very interested in hearing what they need and that my understanding of what they need is limited from my worldview. So that's something that I do. I just acknowledge it periodically in all my teaching, so it's at the front of their mind and hopefully they feel safe telling me about their access needs. Another thing that I do that came up kind of accidentally, and then once I did it, I was like, oh, why wouldn't I have been doing that for the past forever? And because I teach in inclusive education too, so I'm teaching teachers about being inclusive in the future. And I was teaching them about an approach that this wonderful academic in Canada, Shelley Moore, talks about. And in a primary school setting, similar to our special cons and study access plan here, often kids with a disability or there's lots of ways that you can get an IEP, an individual education plan, where it kind of lists, it often just lists what the problem with the kid is kind of very negatively framed often. Anyway, so not always, of course, but we were looking at this approach that Shelley Moore was talking about where we framed it as in a seed packet. So each student got a seed packet acknowledging that really it's not on the kid, it's the conditions that they need to thrive in. So, a little bit like the back of a seed packet where it's like I need to be 5 meters away from other plants and I need access to sunlight. But I can protect the other plants from snails and I bring great shade for whatever. And so we were getting them to think about how they could write seed packets for their kids in their class by co-designing this kind of plan. So tell me what you bring and what you're really good at and tell me what you need in order to thrive in this classroom. And just as an offside, it was an online class and there was like 30 or 40 people there. I'm like, hey, why don't you guys all write me a seed packet in the discussion forum? I'm like, tell me what you're bringing to this classroom and what you're really good at. And also tell me what you need to thrive in this subject this session. And I was like blown away with what people were writing. Not only did I learn things about my students that I've never thought to ask before, but I learned what they needed. And I'm like 12 years into this gig and I've never done that before. And it was by accident. So they were saying things like I need a checklist of the things I need to get done each week. I need a passionate lecturer that, spends a bit of time at the beginning building relationships. I need the lecturer to know my name, to use my name. Like they were saying all sorts of things. And it is such an easy thing to now add into my what I do. There we go. Thanks, Nikki. Seed packet IEP. Hard recommend on anything Shelley Moore puts out into the world. So I won't bang on too much more, but I just want to acknowledge that I loved what you said, Robin, about just the little things. I think one of my biggest learnings over the past little while, when I first got my degree, it was in special education. I think that's a particularly probably problematic name of something, special education. But one of the problems with it is that there's this idea that there's this special knowledge that people must be able to have to teach in this way. That's a special trick or some special learning that I haven't done. But actually, probably the most important thing is to have an inclusive attitude and to be hyper-reflexive in what we're doing and just to be flexible. And so I guess a few things to say on that is that I don't know which example to choose without banging on for too long, but that you know what you were saying before, Robin, about it was a little bit more time. And I think I get that a bit from people. I don't really have time to do this extra thing. If we plan our teaching in a much more flexible way that allows choice and agency from learners, we don't often have to do much more extra. The extra comes on when we've kind of got a fixed lesson plan where we're going to do it this way and, oh, you guys can't get to this, so I have to do extra. But if we sort of are more flexible and assume that learner variability is the norm in the way that we think about our teaching, it ends up kind of not being too much extra. And my example of that is I do draw on universal design for learning to plan my assessment items. And so students always have a choice in the assessment item that they do. We do it in this, Nikki and I work together in a subject where they've got, first of all, they've got a choice to work individually on a group or in a group. And that took away so much anxiety and so many, I hate working in groups and all sorts of things. And so just taking away that, anyway, giving a choice and half choose, or maybe less than half choose group, but lots of people still choose to work in a group. But they have choices to represent their learning in written form, in visual formats, in spoken formats, in all sorts of ways. So that's one way that, so I haven't had to make extra work. It's just a choice on how you choose it. And my final example, I thought I had 3. Sorry, I know I'm talking a lot.
Go for it.
Just the way that Robin also said, sometimes there's such little things that make a huge difference. Because of the elephant in the room, AI, and us all scrambling to know what education looks like and an assessment looks like in the face of AI, we've moved to a lot of opportunities for multiple ways to demonstrate understanding, but a lot more live conversation type things. And there's some thinking to do around there in inclusion, but we have a live conversation. And when they, on the booking form, I just asked whether when they book in a time to have their live conversation on Zoom about their thinking in the subject, there's just an option to add in, are there any access needs that we need to know about for this live conversation? It is just like one simple little line. It took 10 seconds extra to put on the form. And we got so much back from that, that I need an extra booking time because it takes me longer to think things through. So 15 minutes is too tight. Can I book in a double session? Totally. All sorts of things that we learnt about that. So I'll stop there, but there's 3 little things that I'm doing.
Thanks so much, Natalie. And I will just say that you're a panelist, so you're meant to be talking. So thank you very much for talking. Don't apologise for yourself there. Robin, you've got your hand up though. Sounds like Natalie sparked something to add. Go for it.
Yes, she did spark something with regards to, people thinking that it's going to take me extra time, and if I'm flexible, then everyone's going to want an extension. Yeah, it's not the case. And also, if you're flexible with your students, a bit more accommodating and a bit more understanding, they're more understanding with you as well. So when it comes to you getting their feedback back to them, they're a little bit more, oh, that's okay, Robin, no problems. We get it. You've been sick or you've been busy. And so you have less students emailing you being demanding of your time, I find. And I think one of the best compliments I've ever had in a SUES, and it wasn't even about my teaching, it was, I literally feel safe when I see that Robin is my subject coordinator. And I cried that day. I was like, you can't get a better compliment than that. They felt safe seeing my name as the subject coordinator. And that was just because of that. Just, we're all human. It's okay. Let's all be flawed, and that gives you space as well. So, wow. It's less work. It really is.
That's an amazing piece of feedback. Thank you for sharing that. We have started to touch on this a little bit, and we had a bit of a I guess, spoiler alert from Natalie there, we wanted to acknowledge that there are challenges and barriers when we're looking to teach more inclusively, to being inclusive in the education system. Some of these things have been threaded through our examples so far, but I did want to hear from the panel a little bit more around what you see some of the main challenges are. I think, you know, we've all probably got lived experience of navigating those as teachers and as people. I might start with you, Robin, if that's okay. Some main challenges and barriers that you've noted that might be motivating you to work differently.
Yeah, I think online education makes it hard. I find that I make the best connections with my students when we all come to intensive class. And we're in the labs together. And so it can be a barrier. It doesn't have to be. I mean, we have all these amazing technologies now. And I think setting up Zoom meetings is a really good idea. So I found emailing back and forth over and over and over with a student. I started off doing that and then realized, why am I emailing back and forth with this person when I could just set up a Zoom call with them and meet them face to face on Zoom? So I kind of overcame that barrier in that way. Because for me, it is really about, and Jackie Tinkler put a comment about human connection and joy in there. And yeah, I think that connection is really important. So online education can be hard. The other barrier, I think, is that, yeah, at first, like many people, I probably thought, oh, this is going to take me ages, you know, like, and just having that mindset of this is extra work for me. And it took me a while to get over that mindset of, oh, this is more work for me. And then finally I realized, actually, no, this is not more work for me. It's making my life more joyful and more rich. I'm learning from my students, like Natalie and Holly both said, you know, we have a lot to learn from students themselves, not just in terms of their lived experience as a student, but also in terms of their knowledge. I mean, a lot of the medical science students that I teach are experts in a part of medical science that I'm not an expert in. I'm a hematology teacher, but there's many different disciplines in medical science. So, you know, having that reflexive thing where I admit I don't know something. I think a lot of educators find it really hard to admit that they don't know something, but I find it enlightening. I don't know. I'm like, feed me information. Maybe because my dad taught me to love to learn, so he did half the job straight up. But yeah, I think it's just getting past that feeling that it's going to be extra work. That's the main barrier. And well, for me anyway, others may find others. So I'll shut up and let other people speak now.
Thank you. I think that, yes, how we approach it and our attitude towards inclusive education has been sitting underneath most of what we've been speaking about already. So great to kind of articulate that as it stands. Natalie, you had mentioned in answering the previous question that you had kind of more to think about access plans. So let's hear a bit there. Go for it.
I think so many great things have been said, and I just want to pick up on Holly said before about there's some things that we can do in our daily practice. You know, an inclusive attitude is the most important thing, and everyone can action that tomorrow, today, straight away. And so even when you get it wrong, you can say, well, that didn't work today, but hey, we'll give it another go tomorrow. So an inclusive attitude. And the more people that I speak to, I'm in my research and design of subjects, when they talk about things that work for them or their kid across their education journey, it wasn't a teacher that had some sort of specialist training. It was a teacher with an inclusive attitude. Sorry, I went a bit off track then. I just wanted to acknowledge, but that is a big barrier because we can't make people think that way. So like we say it's the easiest part of inclusive education, but it's also the most difficult thing. You can't force people to sort of think a certain way. We can put things in process, but unless those things come also with an inclusive attitude that I'm things are going to be flexible, we're going to find a way, then that can be an enormous barrier. And I think I do see that a fair bit here, if I'm going to be honest. I think that, and in every institution, I think that Pamela, I just saw that come up. I absolutely do, and I would love to send some through to you, so that I'll follow that up afterwards. I think the special cons, I don't have an answer. I'm not sure I have an answer to any of these challenges, sorry, so I'm just going to pop them out there. I think that I have a feeling, and I have for a long time, and I read lots of people talking about this too, that I feel like people don't need to disclose their hardship in order to get the support they need. I can just believe that when people need support, they can have it. So Shelley Moore's done a video on this too. Sorry that I bang on about her, but she's fabulous, about decriminalising supports in schools, that we don't have to fail to get the support, and we don't have to disclose our hardship to get that support. So I just feel that that's a challenge, that, you know, support comes with a special consideration. It's a form and you need this thing. I don't need that as an educator. I don't need to know why you need support. Tell me what you need and you can have that. So I think that there's, and I say this with complexity. I know that there are arguments for, like, the study access plans and stuff like that, but I don't need someone to disclose their details of a disability if they're to be able to access the support. So there's a challenge there in some sort of way. We've set that up, I think, that is interesting to keep thinking about. I think there's I've got a few challenges, 3. So that was the first challenge that I'm thinking through at the moment, or actually 4: inclusive attitude, and you can't force people to think a certain way. Another challenge I have is around AI and what that means in the space of inclusion. And I think that perhaps some of our quick responses to it, I want to make sure that we haven't got ableism in there, that we're not being ableist in our thinking about how, I don't have any answers, by the way. I just think we need to do some more thinking and be aware of ableism. So I saw someone put up Notebook LM, and I think Nikki might have responded. Sorry, it's hard for me to listen and keep the chat going at the same time in my head. So I think that I have started to create AI podcasts of some of the readings to offer it as another format through Notebook LM, because that's a closed, you just upload the thing you want to create. Every time I create the podcast on that, I like giggle and want to tell someone, because it's so amazing. These 2 people then chat about the reading, and they have like backstories and tell jokes, and it's beyond phenomenal. And I listen to it to make sure it's accurate and important. And so, yeah, I'm using it in that way. But a fear I have there, and a challenge up ahead, is I hear lots of people say things like, well, we'll need to go back to face-to-face exams, written exams, to make sure that, because of AI. And that's a really not inclusive thing to go forward with. So I'm a bit worried that our response to AI might narrow our opportunities for inclusion, rather than, I'm worried about that. It's a challenge, I think, that's facing all of us, that I think is interesting to think about. And I can't remember what my other one was, so maybe I'll come back to it later. Talk my way out of it.
And I think even we don't necessarily have to have the solutions to all these problems. I think even other people hearing that there are colleagues contemplating the same sorts of challenges is helpful. So definitely, I think those will be ongoing conversations for a long, long time. Holly, I'll come to you. In terms of main challenges and barriers, and I can see you've been jumping into the chat as well, but is there anything additional you wanted to highlight or even build upon that Robin or Natalie have shared?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, racism and whiteness are a big challenge and obstacle to inclusive teaching and creating culturally safe spaces. I think self-care is a bit of a challenge as well. Like I know there's a bit of a discussion sort of happening in the chat about whether this takes extra time or not. And I don't think people should be taking extra time in excess of what they're workloaded for. I think the idea with inclusive teaching is that you, as Natalie and Robin are saying, you fold it into your teaching already, and it actually ends up saving you time in some ways as well. So I think that's really important. And yeah, systems are a bit of a challenge as well, like having a bit of a chat in the chat about some of the problems with special consideration. And I think too, the way it is a challenge, the way that ability is framed as needing to be an individual request. So what you're doing is you're teaching students about structural and systemic privilege and marginalisation, but then they have to go through systems as an individual to apply for support. So that can be challenging too. And I remember a particular incident with a student where I did encourage them to go to Access because they had a hearing issue, and then the response was just a really individualised response to them in terms of, well, why don't you just wear headphones and turn the volume up louder? And they were really quite upset by that, because they said to me, you know, look, it was a big deal for me to do this, and you told me to do it, and this response just makes me feel really like demoralised. And I was like, yeah, like, I'm so sorry. I thought, you know, but so that's kind of challenging too, because, you know, they're saying to me, you're teaching me this in a class, and then these are the systems that are kind of, yeah, putting me into this sort of individualised space. So yeah, that is quite challenging, because yeah, the way in which access is individualised, but we know that it's structural and systemic as well. Yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying. So those are challenges as well, which is, again, is why I said before that if you do see a gap in the systems or the structures, I do think inclusive teaching also means trying to advocate and critique those gaps as well. We have a service component of our workload, and so I think that is a space where we can do that work as well.
That's a great point, Holly. Natalie, you want to add something?
I just think listening to Holly talk while the people were speaking in the chat as well, that and actually I think someone mentioned it earlier, just around like extensions, like let's just pick that as a point. And I actually think there's probably going to be some people in the room here that disagree likely with what I'm about to say, and please get on the chat, because this is this opportunity to think this through. When Holly said before, I think you said, Holly, I'm pretty loose with extensions. I'm very loose with extensions because, you know, I teach an inclusive education, and to suggest that you can't have more time, that is such an easy flexibility for me to say, and I actually don't care why you need the extra time. And I know I've heard all the arguments back at me. I've had people that are very angry at me about this. Also, my administrative workload is already off the planet. So it's a way to minimise my administrative workload by, like, yes, you have a bit more time. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've never had a student just keep doing and keep doing and keep doing that. And if they do that, they need support in other ways. So they do want, they get their work in and they do get it in usually and close anyway. But that's something to talk about, because like I had a student to me the other day said, I've got two quick examples. I had a student the other day say to me, oh, I just want to read something else and think through that through. Could I have another bit of time? I'm like, yes. Yeah, that's the best excuse I've ever heard. I've still got some learning to do. That's what we're here for. Please take a few more days to read that other thing that you've just thought about before putting your learning together. The second thing is that, you know, that I had a student come to tell me, they started telling me about their whole week, and I wanted to express, I care and I'm here to listen, but also you don't have to tell me details. I'm going to give you the extension. I need to, that dual message I wanted them to have. And she's like, I said, just send me an email, because I got lots of things on in my brain, and then I'll just say, hey, thanks for the chat. Can I confirming my extension? And she said, do you want me to pretend that I was really sick? And I'm like, no, I don't need you to pretend you're really sick to get that extension. And I think it comes around, I'm getting to a point, it comes around from the inconsistency in this approach across staff and what needs to happen. And I just think it's worth a bigger conversation, because, right, it spreads out our marking as well, but and the email, but it you know, I get people that are very angry at me and my approach to extensions here, and I think I can pedagogically justify them in many ways. But they will say things, but when they get out into the workforce, they'll have to work to deadlines and those kinds of things. Well, I actually think the workforce needs to be a bit more inclusive too. And that our core purpose here is learning and understanding and education. Anyway, I've said enough, but maybe it's something worth just considering because there's inconsistency.
Absolutely. Thank you, Natalie. Robin, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, Natalie and Holly are sparking things for me because I have had people say to me before that students have said to them, yeah, but Robin let me do this, you know, so other people in the discipline group be like, you know, if you do this, then we all have to do it. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't know, that's not going to change how I am. So sometimes there's one of the barriers might be that pressure to not sort of be too lenient with students because you might make another academic's life harder. But yeah, I think that's why maybe a good reason why we're here, because if as an institution we can all sort of agree that this is an important space to move into, then there won't be those problems where there's the Robin let me do it and you won't sort of thing. So
Yes.
And can I address also the other question that you just sparked, is that what's not fair to other students? And I think that's our analogy, our metaphor that we're drawing there is that education is a race. And I think that needs to be problematized too. Getting extra support is not unfair. Actually, it's just, you know, evening the playing field, making sure people get what they need in order to access learning. Anyway.
And maybe to be a little bit cheeky, Robin, I mean, if your colleagues are hearing, but Robin let me do this, and maybe there's another colleague that also lets, then maybe there's a groundswell and eventually everyone just has to be more inclusive because they've already had a precedent set. Like there are ways that can work, you know, just quietly sometimes to benefit everybody. This is great. I've definitely had loads of ideas sparked for me too, which is handy. We have our final question and we want to make sure we can dive into some questions from our audience. So I might challenge you with the question, where to next with your practice, to maybe name one key thing you're really focused on, what you're taking forward, you know, if we're thinking as academics about our careers and our teaching practice, what's something that you're really focused on as a next step? I might start with Natalie.
Okay, so this is a real challenge for me and I'm working through it significantly at the moment and slowly. So keen for a discussion. That in my desire, I think, you know, education, good quality education, my students need to feel uncomfortable and they need to maybe do things that are difficult and need to read hard readings that might challenge their thinking, or, you know, there might be discomfort. And I can see in my very firm stance on being flexible and let me know what you need, I can see a lot of students saying things like, I find that reading very hard. Can you give me a picture explanation, or can you give me a dot point summary? Or even this week, someone said to me, I didn't mean to laugh, sorry. Someone said to me, I struggle focusing on long readings. Can you give it to me in like a TikTok format with like pictures in the background and like red things over the bottom? And that wasn't a joke. I had to like, let me think about that. So I need to make sure that I support everyone to meet the high expectations of higher education that requires being uncomfortable, and not making sure that my support does not take away the opportunity to do that. And I know sometimes I get that wrong. I give too much support. They say, hey, I need another example of this. I need another example of this. I need this. I'm like, I'm pretty much writing this assignment for you. And I give support. So my challenge going into the future is make sure being bold. And so sometimes I've had to say, I don't think that's the right support. Can we figure out another way for this to work? Fine. That's my challenge going forward.
And no small challenge. No wonder you're taking it slowly and step by step. Holly, what is on your mind as a next step or something that you're focused on with inclusive teaching?
Thank you. Somebody's already mentioned this in the chat, and it's AI. AI is particularly challenging in an Indigenous studies context because it's not the knowledge base on which AI is developed is not inclusive. It's a white system. It's based on inherited colonial knowledges, and at the moment, some of my colleagues and I are writing a paper on the way in which AI can be used as a distancing tool by students to not engage in inclusive ways of learning and thinking. And so that I think AI is a big challenge because, as someone said in the chat, it can be used for accessibility, but the knowledge base on which it's used is not inclusive at all. So yeah, that's the kind of challenge for me and my colleagues at the moment.
Thank you. And Robin, what's something that you're thinking about as a where to next for your own teaching practice?
Well, I've just started my own HDR journey, and that has helped immensely because being a student again, I'm looking at it from both angles. So I think that's amazing way to sort of see how things need to change, looking at it from both sides. And my direction is actually to explore more into the challenges that neurodivergent students face in workplace learning settings in pathology. The idea is to find students their niche in pathology, because there are challenges in some areas of working in laboratory environments for neurodivergent students. Absolutely. But there's a lot of places for them that I think people just aren't thinking about. So my big challenge now is to hopefully change the minds of industry a little bit. That is probably going to be harder than changing the minds of the educational people, because we're all a little bit more like-minded, I hope. But yes, the challenge for me is getting the lab managers now to see my point. So that's what my research hopefully will address. So
wow,
that's my next direction.
That's really exciting. We'll all be keeping our eye out for updates in terms of that research.
Yeah, I'm super excited about it.
Yeah, of course.
And I have an incredibly supportive team who are, great at inclusive teaching practices too. So shout out to them.
Right. Yes, the people around us are what help us get where we want to go with these things, including everyone in the room. Thank you so much for my panel members stepping through our questions. We had some really great discussion planning this event, and at different points I was thinking, oh, we'll have to make sure you can say that again in the panel for everybody's benefit. And I think we've done really well at covering all the exciting stuff we talked about in the planning stages. We are going to shift into the Q&A portion, but I'm giving a little bit of a moment of transition here, which is something that I like to try and do with my students. We're going to move to inviting your questions. So what's happening in the chat is amazing, and I've been keeping my eye on it, but there is also, we've got the Q&A enabled for Teams. So giving you a couple of minutes for particular things you'd love our panelists to talk about a little more, or things that you'd love their comments on that you're experiencing. Would love to give you a couple of minutes to put some questions together there. Then we'll move over there. Amita is going to help me if she's noticing questions come up, with steering those towards our panelists. And panelists, we might just say you can dive in and answer, when you've got something that you want to jump in and say there. Let's see. I'll give a little more thinking time. Mainly I can see 2 questions so far. Perhaps as well, if anybody wants to pop their hand up to ask a question rather than type a question, that's of course always an option as well.
Yeah, I was going to say we do have 2 questions, but we might wait and just see if people want to ask. Even those who posted in the Q&A panel can ask their question live, and anybody else, whoever wants to ask a question, they're very welcome. This is the time.
Awesome, good questions coming in. Thank you.
Does
Can I ask
anybody
a
want to
question?
ask? Yes, please. Great.
Jackie, that evaluating of the 7-day auto extension. So how do you want to? I don't know if you're up for talking, but is that like research or kind of internal evaluation of that? I don't know.
I'm not putting my camera on because I look like I've been dragged through a hedge backwards at the moment. That paper is, well, we're evaluating that. That's Kelly, Lyndon, Sarah, and Tickle and I, because of sort of some of that general feedback. So we are writing a paper on, well, we'll get several papers out of it. One of which will be focused on the impact that has on students with disability in particular, because it is an extension is an accommodation, can be an accommodation, and we've also found in that a lot of students with SAPs will use the automatic extension over their SAPs because they don't have to then get into it with their lecturer to ask for an extension or have to justify it, or they'll give you 3 days when you need more, all that kind of stuff. And there's plenty of stories about that kind of pushback, even on an official SAP. And so we're writing a paper at the moment. The first one from that, we had hundreds of students, 500 students or something, respond to our survey about that, and probably a couple of hundred academics, I think. So that's coming, and yeah, I suppose for me, who's like a lot of you here, been one of those, if you need an extension, just tell me, and for whatever reason, you don't even have to tell me the reason. Now, I'm not marking everything overnight, so and I organise my marking around it, because it just, and yeah, in the paper, I won't bang on about it too long. Basically, students are using that very carefully and judiciously, and for all the good reasons. And I guess one of the key findings of all of that is the main reason students are using that automatic extension is because our official extension policy won't give them extensions for the things that they need it for: work, stress and anxiety of university, and they're the main things they ask for an extension for, and yet they're not included. And yeah, on the whole, as I said in the chat, the academics who responded were furious about that and an extension, and that the view that students aren't organised and poor time management, and academics should be able to choose whether they get an extension or not, and the like worlds apart, the responses. But yeah, the fact that they'll go for an automatic extension even over their SAP for those reasons is really telling about this space, that a really simple institutional barrier can be so easily addressed with just a no questions asked, 7 days, and that people are furious about a really simple accommodation that actually helps them with their work, from what I can tell. So yeah, we're finishing the paper, and then we just said the other day we'll need to write a report, like intern for the university, on that, just for this purpose as well, because yeah, and as I said, I've got to be in a really good mood to go through the academic data, because it's quite distressing, some of it, the attitudes. I mean, this is the kind of people who talk, answer a survey like that, but it's like, oh my God, do you really think students are sitting around colluding to get 3 extra days on an assignment?
Right.
But
And I think that sorry. I just say I think that I have acknowledgement of diversity. People sort of get to know that if I need an extension, I can ask Natalie and it will be okay. And I would still say huge majority of people still don't use that. Like that fear that they're sitting around and they're just going to take more time. There are a heap of students, what they need is a deadline and to get things in on time. So it's just, I guess, what they need. But yeah, that sounds really interesting. I'll be keep a look out for that.
It's very, very telling in this space. But thank you.
Thanks so much. Robin.
Yeah, just on that, and it sounds amazing, Jackie. I think it's sad if people are thinking, always erring on the idea that students are trying to get one over them. Like that's generally not the case. Most people who are in higher education are there because they really want to be and they want to do well. So this idea that students are just trying to take whatever they can get from us is kind of a sad way of starting to look at things, isn't it? So yeah, it's just a thought.
I can see some amazing questions are coming through in our Q&A section. Amita, you might have an idea about which ones to jump onto. I might defer to you as the Q&A expert.
Yeah, beginner, no problem. So I'll just I'm going to pick on Kelly's question. Kelly Jackson, do you want to come off mute or do you want me to ask your question?
No, I'm. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. Sorry, sometimes this camera gets a little bit flashy, and so that's why I had it off. But yeah, I guess the question is really just from people in the room is what are your top kind of really quick wins for people to get started in this space? If there's sort of 1 or 2 things that we could be doing immediately to support our students, I'd love to hear what you sort of think that they are.
Who wants to start us off there? Natalie, maybe. Robin.
I will.
Right.
I will go. Become an ally. That's a really, really easy, simple thing to do, and automatically you show that you're approaching your work from an inclusive space. So becoming an ally, joining the accessibility and neurodiversity network, become a student again. That's helped me a lot. Yeah, they're just a few tips that I would go with. And yeah, just reading about pedagogy of kindness. It's really helped me a lot.
Thank you. And I did actually just have a pedagogy of kindness book added from, is it Diana Skillington? Do I want to say? No, maybe I don't remember. But anyway, I just had it added to the library. So there's some more resources there for people to use.
Amazing. Thank you.
Just backing on the top of that, I think a practical way you can do that is with an acknowledgement of diversity. So it might not be something you speak, but it might be a message you put on the subject outline site just to help, make that visible, that's a safe space to let me know if you need something, because I find people need things I haven't, people are different, so the needs are different. So it's a flexible space. There isn't anything that I've done that helps everyone. So yeah, making that visible is probably a thing that we could go away with tomorrow or asking them in the introductions. Let me know what you're bringing to the class and what you need to be, what's worked for you in the past.
Yeah, I love that, Nat. Thanks. It's that making it visible, I guess, too, isn't it? Really, I think a lot of people like to think that they are really inclusive just because of their own beliefs. But if we're not making that visible and known to our students, then yeah. So I think that's a really great takeaway. Thank you.
I can see we've got some great responses happening in the chat as well. This is really helpful. Thank you.
Excellent. I'm going to go to Pamela's question. Pamela, would you like to come off microphone? Sorry, come off mute and ask
Yeah,
your question. Otherwise, I'm happy to ask. Yeah.
Yeah, so I am teaching in the podiatry team and we're transitioning to a hybrid next year. And I'm noticing that a lot of our particular assessments, because podiatry is a very practical profession, they're being squeezed into these intensive blocks. Just wondering how that's going to work and how nerve-wracking that potentially might be for students, and what your tips for making these quite structured clinical exams, which I'm thinking can be such a high pressure for the situation. What sort of tips can you think of that might help us be inclusive and kind of reimagine that sort of Aussie clinical exam situation?
Robin, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, because we have very technical exams in our subjects as well.
Mm.
So one of the things I've done, obviously, SAPs, that if they've submitted an SAP, then they'll usually get extra time, which is great. But I've also had it where a student has not submitted an SAP, but while I'm teaching them, I can clearly see that they might benefit from some extra time. So just offering that straight up. And the other one is offering a separate space for them to sit the exam. So when my students do their exams in the lab, they all sit at a microscope and look at blood films under the microscope. And it can be really noisy. There's like dinghy machines that count cells, and sometimes it's super overwhelming for neurodivergent students to be sitting in that room. So just putting them in another room by themselves with their own microscope, that can be hugely helpful. Again, it's something really tiny, and you just need to get someone to come and help you supervise that student, making sure they have their own materials and don't have to share with other students. That's another accommodation I've made. So yeah, I think it's very much case by case basis as well. Just approaching each student and saying, what would help you, what is going to help you succeed, because you can obviously see that they really want to succeed. So just working with each student individually and finding out what will work for them, because everybody's unique. So yeah, I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a really interesting question, because it almost touches on the thing that I was trying to talk before about a challenge about how to this is just a discussion here. I'm thinking this through as we're talking, from half thought coming through. Because I'm really interested in providing opportunities for people with intellectual disabilities to access higher education, and what that might mean. Like, I don't have any immediate solutions, but is an exam is a difficult thing for many people to do, and that automatic recall information. I think we need to have a serious question is if that's something that they're going to have to do in the place we're credentialing them for, or whether we can, or if they can have supports to access that. I think there's some bigger picture thinking actually to do there as well around, is that just something that we do? How can we provide more people? I don't know. That's my half thought. There's some big picture thinking to do there, as well as some wonderful individual things.
Yeah, I agree, Natalie. I think it's difficult in our degree because we're accredited by AIMS and they require students. There's a couple of exams that are hurdle exams, which are hard for everybody, but they must pass those exams, and they're very practical and very industry based about what they will actually be doing when they're on the job. So yeah, it's really challenging. Like one of the exams that I have that is a hurdle exam, I teach a specimen collection subject where students have to pretend to take blood from a mannequin arm that actually has fake blood running through it. It's pretty cool. And if they don't successfully take blood, they don't pass that subject, which is such a huge anxiety inducing thing for some students. And I had one student, because when they do this, they role play being a blood collector with a fake arm. And I had one student come to me and say, I can't role play. I just cannot do it. So we had to come up with ways that this person could actually take blood. And it ended up being my blood. We had to go through ethics to get them to be able to take my blood and do it all properly. And I gave up my arm to a student, you know, which was a very extreme example. But yeah, she just could not role play. She said, if there's not a real person there, I cannot do this. Interestingly, this student had been a paramedic for many years, so could take blood quite well. So that's one of the reasons I was willing to give up my own arm. But anyway, it is, yeah, it is a challenge, because especially when your degree is accredited.
Just being mindful of time, I just wanted to pose one last provocation that Jackie has posted in the Q&A. Why aren't there many men in the room, here or more broadly? Any thoughts?
I'll back up my question, if you like, because everyone goes, "Uh-oh, are we going to go there?" I say that not to be provocative, but I've found the longer, the more I work in this space, the only men I come across here, I mean, this is, gender, not men per se, are those with lived experience. So, they've got a child or family member, but that you don't see them here because it's like their work, like it's learning, teaching work, it's work to do, those sorts of things. Other than, gay, queer men often. So I ask that deliberately because it's part of this space. It's part of things like pedagogies of kindness and care and all that stuff's come out of feminist theory and literature, right? It's women's roles, and women do this sort of care work, and caring is soft and this partly comes a little bit from our survey as well, that the gendered roles and the gendered sort of ideas about teaching and caring and this sort of space and sector, education and disability sectors and all that stuff is gendered. So it's an issue, and I'm not expecting anyone to go, oh yeah, I know, we can fix that. But I think it's important because it's a space where we need male allies here so that they can demonstrate that doing this kind of work is not women's work in that sense, if that makes sense. So I'll throw it in there for that kind of, just to have that in the back of your mind, like when you're talking to people about this sort of space, that and it's not like how do marketing for things to get men interested in girly stuff that they make it masculine, and how to make sure men think that this is their work as well, I guess, in some way. I mean, yeah, discuss, but yeah, that's why I raised it, because I think it's an issue, particularly when you've got men in leadership in these places often.
Absolutely agree with you, Jackie. I think that's a nice segue into the final thing I want to tell you in our last minute, which is obviously there's so much more to talk about than we've had time to start to dig into this, at the very, with some really great kind of compelling pieces. But we wanted to share with you that with the Teaching Academy, we're setting up an inclusive education community of practice. So I think I saw someone earlier, mention there should be an Elmo on this. Where can I find more of this? We're really hopeful that this space will be, beginning to put these things together, working out ways we can advocate for where structural changes are needed. There's been a really interesting exchange around what our kind of casual teaching focused academics are equipped to do when we're thinking about managing things like extensions. All of these topics and more we hope to dig into. So we're we've taken the liberty of adding you all, or we will, to the Community of Practice Teams channel for inclusive education. And we're going to have our first meeting. It will just be an hour on Wednesday, the 8th of October. You'll hear from us again, of course, to remind you. And the goal is to have monthly meetings at that time, every second Wednesday, so we can kind of continue and expand. We see there's a lot of different things we can do with so much energy and interest in this group. So all of that to also say thank you so much, all of the back and forth in the chat. I'm looking forward to reading it post-event and mulling over some of those big questions a little more. But it's really encouraging for us. I think I can speak on behalf of the panelists and Amita to see how many people have shown up, and with so many ideas and such good curiosity as well. So thank you again to my panelists, Natalie, Robin and Holly. Holly, thank you for persevering with that tricky internet. Thank you for Amita's hard work as always, supporting us and putting things together. And I mentioned Cliff, who's joined us from a different time zone, who kind of introduced us a little bit to each other, in my case particularly as a newer staff member. Wishing you all an excellent rest of your day, and thanks so much for your time. It's been wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Helen, for organising this. It was amazing.
My pleasure.